I got these animals on a good bit of grass, and you can tell when they start eating that grass, it really starts plumping them up. And I don't know if I don't know what causes the grass to do that to them. Maybe it's because they're eating a lot, or it could be the moisture in the grass. But they really start plumping up. You're gonna see that when these animals get put on good grass, it really plumps them up real fast. I don't think it puts the weight on them any faster, but it makes them real big. If you take a look at them, you can tell that they got big old guts on them, and that's gonna start happening when they start getting put on that grass. And so real quick, today I wanted to talk about my beliefs on the what I think about the overall economy and the broader economy. Where do I think things are heading in terms of the bigger, broader business sense of things? I wanted to talk about that, but before I got into that, I wanted to go over things that we've been talking about real fast before I get started on that. And so I'm gonna ask a few questions, okay? Let's say that you want to get started in the cattle business. What do I suggest you do? Right, that's the question. I highly suggest that you learn how to grow the grass first. You shouldn't even go and I wouldn't go and buy cattle, okay? I wouldn't go and buy cattle. Why would I not? Because if you buy cattle and you don't have grass, you're going to end up in a situation where you are utilizing the commodity markets all the time to feed your animals. Right, I've talked about grass. Why does grass not grow? If you feed your grass to the animals, I know that it's been a few months since I've talked about this, but let me ask the question: why does grass not grow if you feed it to your animals and you don't? If you put cattle on grass and you don't know how to grow the grass will stop growing. Why? Because when the cattle walk around and they pull the grass off the field, when they are eating the grass, okay, so the bigger, broader sense is that grass plants are essentially a massive chemical reaction, right? I've talked about this all the time. What happens? How does a plant grow? That's the next question. Pause it and answer. Plants, their roots will uptake minerals via the soil. There is a gas in the atmosphere called carbon dioxide, and then there is a cell in the plant leaf called the chloroplast. And when the chloroplast interacts with the sunlight, when the sunlight goes through the chloroplast, the plant will produce sugar. The sugar acts as energy for the plant material, and the plants will uptake minerals via their soil, via their roots. And so when those minerals are combined inside of the plant, and then energy is introduced via sunlight, and then carbon is obtained via the atmosphere via gas. As a gaseous state, carbon is obtained. That carbon interacts with the energy and the minerals and produces the physical plant material. And so when cattle, even if you as a human being, if you walk around and you pull fruits out of the ground, if you find let's say you find a berry bush, and you pull berries from that bush, right? You pull berries from that bush and you start eating those berries. What you are eating is the stored carbohydrates from that plant. And so eventually what will happen is that you will begin to deplete the soil of those minerals. Because just a way to look at it is, if like those berries, if they fell on the ground and nobody ate them and no animal ate them, and those berries decomposed, the minerals and all of that has been stored in the fruit will be released back into the ground, where it will decompose and then be reobtained by the new plant material. And so in a situation where a third party is now involved, like an animal or a human being has walked up to the plant and has started to eat the fruit from the plant, or has started to eat the vegetative material from the plant, you are actually pulling the minerals away from the environment and storing them in your own body. Right, I've talked about this. The same calcium that is in your bones is the same calcium that is in the soil. Right, I've talked about this. I talk about this all the time. The same calcium that is in your bones is the same calcium that is in cow's milk. And so if you go around and you eat fruit, you are depleting the environment of those minerals, slowly but surely. And eventually what's going to happen is, if you do not replace those minerals, your grass will stop growing. And so, why do I suggest learning how to grow grass first? Because I highly suggest it, because even if you mess it up, even if somehow you mess it up, right? I mean, you've been watching me do this every single day, and you still just somehow manage to mess it up, right? You've watched me plant grass 15 times, and you still somehow messed it up. I don't know how you did that, but you did. Right? I mean, sit there and really, I'm telling you, you probably, I would highly suggest that you sit there and really think about it. What fertilizer am I going to use? How am I going to apply that fertilizer? What are the weather conditions going to be like? What kind of grass am I going to plant? What kind of equipment do I have available? Sit there and really think about it. Don't just start going and then run off into the middle of nowhere with no idea what you're doing. Right? I mean, sit there and really think about it. You should not be messing it up. And here's the thing. It's like you could copy and paste what I'm doing and it would work to some degree. Even if you didn't want to come up with anything on your own. Right? I mean, how are you possibly messing it up? If you mess it up once or twice, that's fine. Right? But if you're messing it up over and over and over and over and over, you just stop what you're doing. All right, and take a look at what you're doing. Really think about it. All right, I've shown you, me, when I plant grass, I'm about a 90% success rate, maybe 93% success rate. Maybe a little bit more. And, I've always said, you should be asking somebody who knows what they're doing. If you talk to somebody who is extremely good at something, you will be able to tell when you listen to them. Right? Like me, I use the, it doesn't matter what we're talking about. If we're talking about animal nutrition, if I listen to somebody who's running 100,000 cattle a year on a commercial feedlot, and they're the main nutritionist for the animals, they're probably going to know to a good degree what they're talking about. And even me, I don't do what they do. I don't do it to that level, right? I'm not like a mixing, hay, and I'm not mixing, I'm not mixing ionophores, and I'm not doing all that stuff, right? I'm not mixing ionophores into a certain grain, and then I'm not doing that, right? I don't do it to that level. Some of these people on these feedlots can put like 5 pounds a day on an animal. 5 pounds. Me, I put on about 2.5 to 3 pounds. And so, there are people out there that can do this better than me. But even then, if they saw what I was doing, they would be like, you know what, this is actually a pretty good idea. Could you increase your gains by incorporating a silage instead of a hay or something, or whatever it may be? Sure, right? I probably could. But in terms of, for me, this works out very well. Why? Because animal nutrition is not the only thing that I'm worried about. Right? I'm thinking about the business side of things too. I don't need any equipment to put my cattle on grass. I need very minimal equipment. I don't need a baler. I don't need a mower. I don't need a rake. I don't need none of that. I don't even need irrigation. Right? I just have a tractor, and if I have a tractor, I can essentially plant whatever grass I want. And then I can just put my cattle on it. And when I put my cattle on it and I don't have any equipment, and I just utilize the weather from the environment to grow my grass and to raise my cattle, I make a boatload of money. I make like a 75% return on my money, 50 to 75% return on my money, like every 8 to 9 months. Right? I gotta think about a lot of things. And if I do that, and if I put on 3 pounds a day, 2.5 pounds a day, then I'm doing okay. I'm doing just fine. It works out for my business. Right? Do I really want to go and get a big tub grinder, and then do I really want to start planting hundreds of acres of corn in the middle of Texas with no irrigation? No, I don't want to do that. I've already said the corn business is not something I would touch in Texas with a 50,000-foot pole. I wouldn't grow corn in Texas with, I wouldn't touch the corn business in Texas with a 50,000-foot pole. Right? The hay business and the cattle business makes a lot of money in this area. We don't have a lot of groundwater. but the environment grows a lot of hay. About 8 to 9 months out of the year, I can grow hay without any irrigation. And our soil is good, right? Our soil retains moisture. I'm not surrounded by sand everywhere that I go, right? It's not like I don't know, like California. I don't know. California is right next to the beach, right? They probably have a lot of sand. There are places in Texas that are real close to the beach, probably a lot of sand. But in this area in central Texas, we have a lot of black clay. It's either black clay or sand. And if you go to the field and you take a look at the field and it's black clay, then, you know, clay is going to hold on to the moisture pretty good. And so, you know, you can even go on the internet and just look it up. What's the website that I use to collect soil data via a satellite? What's the website? Answer the question. Soil Web. Just go on Google and look up Soil Web. You can look up the pH of your soil. You can look up the crop classification of your soil. You can look up what type of soil you have to what depth. You can look it all up for free. Right? I mean, it's not hard. And so in terms of the overall broader economy, where do I see things going? And I know it's been a long time since I've talked about this. It's probably been a year. But what do I believe? You know, I talked about this a long time ago. I said on a video where I said that I was going to purchase option contracts on a long-term bond, right? I said I was going to purchase the 20-plus year treasury bond, and I was going to purchase an option contract on that bond as a insurance policy in terms of if the economy rolls over. But I mean, I put money into that, and the expiration is in February or so of next year. And when I was making that video, I was talking about my long-term outlook on the interest rate. And what did I say that I believe that the interest rate is going to be? In terms of my personal belief, what do I think that the interest rate is going to be? I think that the interest rate is going to go to zero and be stuck at zero, or even potentially go negative over the long course of my life. Like, I think that when I'm 50, 60, or if interest rates go high, it's going to be because of something like massive inflation. Right? I mean, in terms of just with the way the economy is going right now, if things are just kind of okay, but they're not doing horribly, over the long term, I believe that the interest rate is going to go to zero and stay stuck at zero, or it's going to go negative. That's my long-term belief. And when I take a look at things right now, right? Okay, so in 2008, it was the great financial crisis, right? It was the great financial crisis. Subprime mortgages imploded, right? Subprime mortgages exploded. People were taking ninja loans, and they were just buying up properties. And then when the rate ballooned, everybody got clapped at once, right? And 12 years later, it was COVID. Right, in 2020, we had COVID, and then there was massive spending. There was a multi-trillion dollars spent, deficit spent, to keep the economy from collapsing, right? And then, it's already been 4 years since COVID. It's already been 4 years since that happened. Probably within the next 8 years, there's going to be another financial problem. I don't know what it's going to be. It might even be a war, right? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But within the next 8 to 10 years, there's probably going to be some other financial problem. Something's going to happen. And then we're going to have to reassess what's going on. The government, not the government, but the central bank might believe that it's a good idea to drop the rate. They might believe that it's a good idea to start printing more money, whatever it may be. And I've already said that in terms of the long-term outlook, if we had about 20% inflation over the last about 4 or 5 years, about the last 4 years, we had about 20% inflation. And the central bank right now is talking about they want 2% inflation a year as their target goal. And if we have 2% inflation over like the next 9 years, that's essentially another 20%. And you compound that inflation, that's essentially 20% inflation. And these are my long-term, what I believe is going to happen. I believe that within the next 10 years, half of the people over 65 will not be able to retire. Half. If you're over 65, you're not going to be able to retire. That's what I believe. If you're, that over the next about 10 years, this is going to happen. 50% of the people cannot retire. Out of the 50% of the people that can retire, even if they do retire, they will not be able to retire comfortably. They will always be worried about money. And maybe 1 to 2%, 1 to 3% of the population is just like, yeah, I could retire tomorrow and it wouldn't matter. So 50% of people are not going to be able to retire. 47% of people are going to retire uncomfortably. And about 3% of the population is just going to be able to retire and go do whatever they want. That's my big belief. In terms of, because I've always said that in terms of being poor, right? In terms of being poor, one of the 3 conditions for being poor, number 1 is that you don't have any money. Number 2 is that you have no retirement. And number 3 is that you cannot stop yourself from imploding. Right? You cannot stop yourself from acting like an idiot. And then you always end up back in number 1, right? And so those are a couple of my big predictions. 50% of the population will not be able to retire. 47% of the population, even if they do retire, will probably have to come back and work at a certain point or will retire uncomfortably. And 1 to 3% of people will be able to essentially do whatever they want. That's my big belief. And if we take the age gap down and say instead of talking about 65-year-olds, we talk about 25-year-olds. If you're 25 right now, in the next 10 years, what's going to happen is you're going to become you are already a poor person. And then within the next 10 years, you are going to be stuck as a poor person forever. And in 30 years, you're just going to not be able to retire. That, if we took the age gap down, right? We said we went from talking about 65-year-olds to talking about 25-year-olds to talking about 20-year-olds. I've already said if you're past about 15, 18, it's too late. If you've already become a poor person, you're probably stuck like that forever. And if you're 20, within the next 10 years, you will have cemented your poorness forever. You will probably be stuck that way forever. If you're 20 right now and you really get a grip on it, and even if you're 30, if you really get a grip on it, you could wake up tomorrow and not be poor if you really felt like it. You could just be broke. Right? I talk about things like considering the money, right? I talk about things like that all the time, right? You should be able to look at something and determine how much money is involved. You see me do this all the time, right? How much do I think the cattle, how much do I think this animal is worth? How do I get the price of it? Let's say if I'm going to go and buy, okay, let me ask this question. Like right now, I'm buying a piece of land, right? I'm buying a piece of land. And I want to know how much that land is worth. How do I figure it out? That's the question. You go into the bank and then you ask the banker. The banker has somebody in that bank. If the bank lends for land, they will have somebody in that bank right now that their entire job is to do these loans. And they will send an appraiser to the property and take a look at it. And then they will tell you your property is worth this much money. Right? You ask the bank. If you want to figure out how much an asset is worth, how do you figure that out? You ask somebody who knows what they're doing when it comes to that asset. It could be a room full of gold. It could be a room full of guns. It could be a herd of cattle. It could be land. It could be a rental property. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. You ask somebody who knows what they're doing. And then they will tell you. Your land, your whatever is worth this much money. And then once you figure out how much the land is worth, you go to the, then you can do whatever, right? I mean, if you have cash, you can pay cash for it. If you take it, you can also take a loan for it. right? I mean, you go and you take a loan for it. You take a loan for $500,000. You're buying and I actually wanted to talk about this in terms of the overall broader economy. Where do I think that what do I think is going to happen, and et cetera, et cetera. I believe that over the next about 10 years or so, land prices are probably not going to go much higher. Well, land prices, they don't go up very fast anyway. They didn't really go up fast until about 4 years ago, 3 years ago. But I mean, people are saying in the commercial real estate business, especially, people are saying that building evaluations and property valuations are actually going to go down. Property values are going to go down, and that these rates are not sustainable. And I think that the big thing, the best thing to do right now is to work a good deal. Is to get if you can find a property, you want to get a bit of a good deal on the price. If you can get a couple of, 5-10% off of the listing price, 20% off of the listing price, not even the listing price, but if you get the appraisal value, and this also depends on where you are, because if you're in Austin, I know that in Austin, property valuations have already started to kind of tank. I'm already hearing that some homes are down like 20% already, and so I don't know what's going on with that. But you should go and ask the bank, see what the bank says the property's worth, and then you should probably try and get about a 10% deduction off of that price, because with the way things are going right now, the economy's not good. Right, and also I think that I was going to talk about this in terms of the overall thing, and that the possibility that there might be the next big problem, financial problem, might be a war. It might be a war. There might be a war. In a situation with a war is usually, from my understanding, I haven't ever lived through a war, right? I haven't. I've spoke about this before, but the idea of a war zone is that, like, if you listen to people who actually have been in a war zone, I mean, it's like the most like what the heck, like kind of situation you could ever imagine. Like in Vietnam, 4 million people died. In Korea, 4 million people died. In World War II, 75 million people died. Like, what does it look like to see 20 million, like 10 million people die a year? I don't know. Nobody knows. Right? I mean, in the various Middle Eastern conflicts, over 1 million people died. Right? I mean, what does that even look like? I mean, who knows? Nobody knows. Right? I mean, war is completely different. Right? And I haven't lived through a war. Right? I haven't lived through a war. I don't think, a lot of people haven't. And what happens during times of war, I don't know. Right? I mean, like, what happens? I mean, does, I don't know. Right? Imagine a situation where, imagine a situation where legitimately 100 million people die. Has anyone ever seen that before? No. I mean, unless, imagine a situation where it's like take a look at like the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Imagine what the people say, right? They were running, they were dropping napalm on people, right? I mean, lighting people on fire with flamethrowers. I mean, they would be walking across the road, and boom, a landmine would go off and blow a person to smithereens. Right? And this stuff was happening and they would be walking through the jungle, and then a machine gun would just open up and kill like 50 people instantaneously. Right? I mean, does anybody know what that looks like? No. Right? I mean that's war. I mean, I listen to stories, and I'm like, we probably don't want that. Right? A war zone is completely different. Like, if you went to Afghanistan right now, or if you went to, Iraq, if you went to, wherever, if you went to Vietnam back in the day, if you went to Korea back in the day, if you went to, World War II back in the day, I mean, you probably would never want to see that again. I mean, it's probably the most gruesome, most, like, horrible thing that you could ever imagine. Right? I mean, the worst thing that you could ever imagine. I mean, it would make modern day, a problem, like, even me, it's like, even me, right? I mean, it's like 5 people got robbed, 1 person got shot, 4 people got killed. It would make that look like a kiddie playground, right? I mean, sometimes I'll just sit there and it'll pop up on my YouTube feed, and I'll watch a interview done by somebody who was running up the beach on D-Day, and what that looked like. I mean, it was like you would see thousands of people dying every like minute. I mean, what did it look like to be in Vietnam? I mean, what did that look like? I mean, it's crazy. It's like the most horrific things you could ever imagine. Right? I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, you would be crawling through a tunnel, and then they would gas the tunnel, or they would collapse the tunnel on you, and then you would die. Right? I mean, and then, like, listen to combat stories and things like that. A guy, I watched this guy on YouTube, and he was talking about his story, and it was like, he was in a battle, and he got hit by a grenade. Right? I mean, and all sorts of crazy stuff, right? I mean, it's like and I remember yesterday or 2 days ago, I was watching this video, and I think it was, I don't know where it was, but it was in the Middle East somewhere. I think it was in the Middle East somewhere. And these kids were trying to pull water across the street. Like, they had a tank of water, and they put it on a sled, and they were pulling it from one side of the street to the other. And there was a camera watching these guys, and the camera zoomed in on them. And when they zoomed in on them, there was actually a pool of blood in the middle of the street. And they were dragging the water across from one side of the city, or one side of the street, to the other side of the street, because the one side of the street had water and the other side of the street didn't have water. And if they tried to cross the street, they would essentially just get murdered. A sniper would kill them. Right? I mean, you can't even get water. Right? I mean, war is crazy, right? I mean, if you actually go and look at these stories, I mean, it's insane. War makes like a violence look like a playground. I mean, people in Vietnam, that was crazy. A guy, like a Delta Force guy, jumped out of a helicopter with a knife and stabbed like 32 people to death, was shot like 11 times. Right? I mean, it's crazy. Right? I mean, but the next big financial crisis might be a war. It might be. China's got a lot of tension with Taiwan and the Philippines. China and the whole China Sea, the China Sea and the Philippines and China are not under very good diplomatic relationships right now either. It's not just Taiwan; it's also Philippines. Ukraine and Russia are going at it. Right? I mean, Israel and Hezbollah, I believe that's the they're blowing each other up over there too. Right? I mean there are a lot of big conflicts right now, and it's like, I don't know. I mean, what does it look like to have 100 million people die? I don't know. What does it look like to have 5 million people die? I don't know. All right, if you want to know what it looks like to have 5 million people die, ask a Vietnam veteran. If you want to know what it looks like to have 5 million people die, ask a Korean War veteran. If you want to know what it looks like to have 75 million people die, ask a World War II veteran. I mean, it's crazy. The level of violence and the level of death is just ridiculous, right? I mean, it's like, you're seeing, like, there are thousands of people dying every day. I mean, that's nuts, right? I mean, I hope that we don't have a big war. But I would say that within the next 10 years or so, that there's going to be another financial crisis. Something's going to happen, and there's going to be another financial crisis. And rates are probably going to go to 0 or potentially even negative. And if there's 20% inflation, I mean, half of the country is practically completely screwed. You're going to be in a situation where it's like the Great Depression. You're not going to be able to afford basic needs. I mean, you're going to be struggling all the time. It's going to be like a Great Depression 2.0 on steroids. Right? If there is like 50% inflation, if there's 25% inflation, if something happens and there's another 25% inflation over the next like 10 years, if there is a steady 2% inflation over the next 10 years, right? So 20% inflation, and something really bad happens, and then there's a lot of deficit spending, and then there's another 30% inflation, that's 50% inflation. If we have 50% inflation over the next 15 years because something went horribly wrong, there was a war, we needed, the government deficit spent a lot of money, there was already 20%, there was already 2% inflation a year for the next 10 years, and then we had a big inflation spike because of a war or something happened, and now there's 50% inflation. It's going to be like Great Depression 2.0 for like half of the country. 50%. It's going to be like Great Depression 2.0. And if 50% of the country is screwed, and 1%, it's a very real possibility. I think that there's going to be another financial crisis within the next 10 years. Something's going to happen, and there's going to be some sort of a response to that crisis. And if the response to the crisis is to take rates to zero, keep them at zero, and then print a lot of money, or even take the rates negative, there's going to be a tremendous amount of inflation. And the central bank is already saying that their target goal for inflation is 2% a year. Over 10 years, that's like over 9 years, that's like 20% inflation if you compound it. We had about 20% inflation over the last 4 years, and that 20% inflation really messed up a lot of people. If we have 10% inflation, if we have 20% inflation over the next 10 years, and then something bad happens, and then there's a massive spike in inflation, I mean, like half of the country is going to go through like Great Depression 2.0. And so that's my big outlook on the overall things. But if there is a lot of inflation, I'm not like a doomsday person, right? I mean, if there is a lot of inflation, if you're holding assets, then if you're holding assets that are essentially equitable, like you are holding onto assets that are as valuable as the cash itself, right? I talk about what is equity. Equity is just a number applied to something that is not cash, that is equivalent to what the estimated cash value is, right? If I look at a number 1 to 1.5 type medium large frame animal that is 450 pounds, and the feeder cattle market is going sideways at 235, 240, the animal's at a body conditioning score 6. Well, I anticipate that animal's worth about $1,100. Something like that here in Texas. Right? And so that's the equity value. How do you obtain the equity value? You liquidate the animal. But if you are holding on to something that is as valuable as cash, and the cash is inflating, then your assets are also inflating. If you wake up tomorrow and your $1 only buys you 50 cents worth of things, the inflation rate, let's say you have $1 and it only buys you 75 cents worth of things. Inflation is 25%. So you used to be able to buy it with $1, but now you need $1.25. Well, your animal, your asset that you were holding on to that was worth $1,000 is now also worth $1,250. Because why? Because the asset is worth as much as the money itself. So if you can hedge, you can utilize capital to hedge inflation. All right, and you probably want to get ahead of this right now as soon as possible. You should have some sort of investment strategy. Right? I don't have an investment. I don't have like an investment advisor. I manage my own asset portfolio. Right? I think about what do I want to do in terms of a deal. How do I want to structure my deal? Why do I want to structure it that way? Why do I want to purchase this asset? I do all of these things by myself. I don't have somebody that's like showing me or that's like advising my asset portfolio. I manage my asset portfolio by myself. And so, but I think that within the next 10 years, there's going to be another great some kind of a financial problem. And I legitimately believe, I'm not saying this to be a fear monger. I'm not saying this to be like, oh my God, everybody should be scared. I'm saying that there is a very real possibility that it has something to do with a war. Something to do with a war. I don't know what it's gonna be, and a lot of people like the only people who really know what a actual war looks like are old people and people who were in the Middle East. Like if you ask somebody like what did you see when you were in Fallujah, right? Like when they were in the invasion of Fallujah, what did you go through? I mean, that was crazy, right? They were blowing up buildings. Hundreds of people were dying every hour. I mean, just nuts, right? I mean, a war zone is completely different, right? I mean, it's completely different. Violence like you have never seen before. I mean, it's like you listen to these stories and it's like, oh my God, right? I mean, you were lighting people on fire. I mean, just massacring people. People were being blown up by landmines. I mean, just being mowed down by machine guns. I mean, millions of people were dying every year. I mean, it's crazy, right? I mean, it's violence on a scale that's never been seen before by the recent generation, unless you were in somewhere like the Middle East. And in the various Middle Eastern conflicts, there were over 1 million people that died there too. I mean, that's crazy, right? I mean, when's the last time you've heard of anywhere that's like 1 million people were killed? Just straight up murdered. 1 million people. Never, right? I mean, except for somewhere like the Middle East. Right? When's the last time you heard of 4 million people dying? Never. Right? I mean, but when did it happen? Like in the Korean War and in the Vietnam War. When's the last time you heard of 75 million people dying? Never, right? Except for like a World War II. All right, I mean, it's crazy, right? And I hope we don't have a war. I mean, I've never seen one, and do I want to see one? No. Why would anybody want to see violence, right? Like, are you actually dumb? Right? I mean, violence is like imagine just walking across the street and boom, getting your head blown off, right? I mean, it's like you're so scared to cross the street that you have to drag water from one side to the other. Because there's blood all over the road, because people have just been getting their head popped off walking across the street. It's like, is that what you want? Probably not. Is that what I want? Absolutely not. I mean, who would want that? Are you dumb, or are you legitimately insane? And so, but I do think that there is going to be a big financial crisis within the next 10 years. The rate is probably going to go to zero, get stuck at zero, or even potentially go negative. And there's possibly going to be a large amount of inflation. The central bank is already saying that they want 2% inflation a year over the long term. Right? If there's 2% inflation over the next 10 years, that's another 20% inflation. 20% inflation is what we had over the last 4 or 5 years, right? If there's 20% inflation and then something bad happens and then the central bank decides that it's time to produce a lot of stimulus, and then now there's 50% inflation, now there's 40% inflation, half of the country is completely screwed. I mean, Great Depression 2.0. And so, how do you hedge against that? You buy investments. You obtain equitable investments. Investments that are essentially as valuable as the cash itself. And if the cash loses value, then your assets go up in value. That's how you do it. And so that's it for me today, YouTube. Y'all have a good one.